first cab off the rank, turning to work in the office, is it making a comeback? Now, this is like this little delicate dance, right? So legally, employers weren't able to force employees to come into the office, but recently that has been removed. But with the current challenges in the labor market, how many actual companies want to do this, right? If you push too hard, people will leave. But in the news, we're actually seeing Apple's forcing employees to come back 3 days a week. They've just delayed it. You've got Tesla forcing everyone to return to the office, with Musk saying things like, everyone at Tesla is required to spend a minimum of 40 hours in the office per week. If you don't show up, we will assume you have resigned. And then he's also said, the more senior you are, the more visible your presence must be. And
his tweets are amazing, by the way. I love the one is you can work from home after you've worked 40 hours a week in the office.
Oh, it's serious. But you've also got like Google spending $1.4 billion on a building in London to try and attract 10,000 people into the office. And obviously we know that they do their infamous table tennis and meals and activities and games and all those kind of things. So Charlie, is this the real thing? Like, is everyone going to start pushing back people into the office?
Do you know what's interesting here? I want to tell a story about something completely different, but I think this sets the scene here that is huge, right? So have you ever noticed with like Shopify themes that the add to cart button and I think it's like the purchase button are all in the same place?
Always, yes.
Do you know how they decided that was the place?
No.
Yeah, so this is like, I can't believe this. I did a conversion rate optimization course many, many years ago. And what had happened is eBay had put the button there and they realized that if they modeled what the big names eBay was doing on the smaller sites, they would convert dramatically better. But if sites had the add to cart button or the purchase button in a different area, like it wouldn't do as well. So what tends to happen over time, and there's so many examples of this, is that once one of the big names starts to set something as the standard, everything else starts to be so.
Yep.
And then another really good example of this is podcasting. Like everyone's like, you can't do a video podcast. And then Joe Rogan did one that was successful and then it started to become the way it happens. So now what I find super interesting here is Apple, Google, Tesla, arguably some of the biggest and most powerful brands in the world. Now that they've set this standard, I think you'll find a lot of other organizations start to follow suit.
Yeah, and it's funny that you actually mentioned that. The amount of times I've duplicated like e-commerce stores in SaaS world saying, don't try and educate people on something new, just follow what the big guys are doing. And so like that trend happens through and through. But even like on the ground here in Melbourne, like the volume of people at cafes, at lunch spots, at restaurants, like the indicators from what I am seeing is that there are a lot more organizations. They don't have to be the big names. And I've looked to see if there are any major Australian big names that are really pushing for this. But the volume of people every week just keeps increasing and increasing. And I don't know if this is sentiment because businesses haven't had the same throughput or haven't had the same productivity or output that they've expected from employees, or that it's more them going, I've got office space and I need to utilize this office space because I got a lease for another 2 years. Do you think that we're just seeing like a lagging trend where then when everyone's leases come up, they're just going to be like, nope, not reviewing it, and we're going to see some of that come through? Or do you think that this is a sign of going, nope, we've just seen it a couple of years and everyone's going to come straight back in?
I've got a bit of a conspiracy theory. Can we go with this?
Yes.
Yeah, so I want you to imagine, we're just going to use Melbourne as the example here, right? If you're the city of Melbourne and you've invested all this money in infrastructure, so just think over the years, not just this year, like how much you've put into like public transport, buildings, roads, amenities, like all the things the government spend money on to make these sectors work, and then suddenly everyone not using it. So I'm pretty convinced that behind the scenes, there's actually a big government push to get people back to cities because of what it supports. Because there's a lot of businesses that have really struggled who need people in the city to operate.
Heaps.
So if you're a cafe in a large office building and you used to have a ton of foot traffic and now it's down to like under 50%, like you're getting crushed at the moment. So when it comes time to renew your lease, it's questionable if you would pay the same for that lease because you don't get the foot traffic. So I think there's a lot of vested interest behind the scenes in getting the cities back to work. And I'm certain there's a lot of conversations we're not privy to that are pushing that in a bigger way everywhere. Yeah. So I'm very, very certain on that. The second point I'll make there, though, is can you imagine being like Apple and you spent $1 billion on a headquarters and there's no one there?
Oh man, come on.
Yeah, I would absolutely be wanting to push people into that as well. And I think you really could make the argument in a lot of these like more technology companies that like being in the same room does have value. It really does. Like some businesses really do thrive, and maybe creative ones or engineering ones or things where you work in a team, I should really like articulate here. Like they do benefit from getting people in the same room. This isn't all businesses, by the way, but is definitely some of them. So I can see that as a huge advantage here. And like one of the things I'll mention here as well is I heard an interesting comment by someone who used to work in an office quite a bit, is saying that one of the things he thinks isn't happening very well in the last 2 years is that the junior staff they bring on or the new people they bring on aren't being mentored very well.
Yep.
Or don't have the opportunity to network with other people, which they're seeing the ramifications of, which I hadn't considered as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that even with the accounting firm that we use, one of the companies I'm part of. Like for them, bringing on juniors has been the biggest challenge. So over that 2-year period, they've actually come to us as a client and said, look, we've had a challenge bringing on new graduates and actually getting them up to speed at the same rate that we used to do it. And so they had people on calls who were like fresh graduates for probably about 12 months, which is like unheard of. Right, where they were just on the calls, not really doing anything besides like taking notes, seeing how this kind of reputation is built and how to deliver things to clients and all these kind of things. But they're just like, yeah, to your point, it is taking longer. And so before we recorded this, I actually did a bit of research to try and validate where does this kind of trend go? So during sort of
wait, is work from home over?
No.
All these Zoom rooms, they're going to end up in people's houses just empty now.
Yes, that is exactly it. Well, it's actually I'm going to tell 2 stories. So the first one was about 10 years ago. The CEO of BHP, a gentleman called Marius Glover, he had offices throughout like New York, Australia, etc., and Singapore. And he actually had his permanent Zoom room, which was like connected to his main offices in all of these major cities. And he got them built where the backgrounds and everything, all the technology was exactly the same. So that any time that he ever did a press conference, anytime he ever did a major meeting, anytime he ever did anything, no one knew where he was because it was always the same throughout everywhere. And I
dig it. It's got like a specific bookshelf or something. Yeah, I dig it.
And I'm like, yeah, that was him, albeit he was at the office, not working at home. But you could totally imagine that people will end up doing that kind of stuff of just going, cool, whether I'm in Australia or Asia, it doesn't really matter. But the point I'm going to make is I was looking for, well, what kind of trends would we see on this? I'm like, co-working space is a great trend. The volume of co-working spaces that have opened, it's dramatically cut off, right? Like over the last 2 years, it's like non-existent. But then even ourselves, we had a WeWork space in Collins Street, Melbourne, and they were completely closed down. And so we actually got moved to a completely different WeWork. And then I've just read the Victory offices in Sydney closed 4 Sydney CBD offices. And so to add to your speculation, is this the rise of satellite CBD offices? Like, will these co-working spaces go out to, I don't know, more like metro areas as opposed to centralized business districts or like more rural areas to try and bring in and support those people going, you want a bigger house, you want backyards, you want all these things? No worries, you can still come to an office, just come into this spot.
That is such an interesting point. I'll tell you my view. I actually think it's just a period of like normalization. I really do. I think that when the last few years happened, we had a mass exodus to work from home out of necessity. And now that I think we're pretty much considering the events of the last few years over, I'm picking my words carefully here to not get in trouble with YouTube. I think I did it right there.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. I would have like beeped it or something.
Yeah, no, I'll take it. Anyway, the point being is I think we're going to see a normalization here. But I will say there's some counterpoints to this as well. Like your point on offices is huge here. So let's pretend that everyone went work from home in the last few years. I think we're going to see a reasonable clawback.
Yep.
I think about half the people that went fully remote are probably going to come back into offices in some way, maybe 3 days a week, potentially 5 days a week, particularly in areas where teamwork and collaboration is important. But the counter I have to that is I look at the research we did in our last podcast episode about how much, like in Australia in particular, government is expanding into the regions. So these are the, and when I say regions, I really want to clarify that. These are cities that are around a capital city, maybe within 90 minutes.
Yep.
So any major regional hub around a capital city, so this in Sydney would be like your Wollongong and Newcastles. In Queensland, it would be like your Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast, and I'd probably say even Toowoomba and things like that, around like all those major regions. Victoria, it's your Bendigo, Ballarat, Geelong, and Peninsula.
Yep.
Like I very much feel that those sectors are going to counter this a little bit as well. So I would think that, fixing the NBN, investing more in staff there, that we're just going to go through this normalization period.
Hey, fellow business owner, if this topic and value-packed short video has resonated with you at all, and you want to dive deeper into being a full stack business owner, check out the full episode by clicking the link on your screen or in the description right now.